Hi there, Lorna Baker here, and I'm speaking to you about boundaries part 2. Now, I love the topic of boundaries because they're involved in all of our relationships, in our conversations, our interactions with new people, every event we go to. And some boundaries are healthy and some are unhealthy. And the truth is we all battle on some level with having good boundaries. And I love, just going back to what I spoke with last time, that true boundaries, true godly, healthy boundaries really are the things that we do because the Lord has called us to do them. And anything outside of that, if we're walking in obligation or guilt or trying to people please, it's not what God has called us to do. And so we are crossing boundaries and we are stepping into realms that God didn't intend for us. And the safest place for us to be, which means we need to learn to hear the voice of God, is say, God, I only want to do what I see you doing, and I will agree with you and walk in that. And so, a lot of working with people, we're helping them to come into a place where they can hear the Lord and say yes to Him, which means that they need to say no to a lot of things that they get into that aren't healthy. Now, in a nutshell, we spoke about boundaries being where one person ends, another person begins, and that boundaries are unseen but defined behaviors and attitudes and beliefs and values that determine who comes into our worlds, and then once they're in, what the rules are in having people in our world. And with boundaries, it very much is about responsibility, that there's no victim when it comes to boundaries. That if somebody crosses my boundaries, I'm not a victim because I didn't establish a boundary to keep them out. So we're not responsible for what other people do, but we are responsible to have our boundaries, and we're responsible in terms of how we react or respond to people who aren't being healthy, whether we can confront them or get them out of our world somehow. And also we are responsible to communicate what our needs are and what the parameters are around what we're doing with healthy people. So that, because there is a saying that says, silence gives permission. So if I'm being silent about what I need, people won't know, and they'll assume that I'm okay with certain things. So it's very important that we can help people to work with boundaries in their lives. Cloud and Townsend wrote a book called Boundaries years ago that became very popular. And one of their quotes is this, that we change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. Consequences give us the pain that motivates us to change. And this is so true, that when we're working with people who have chaos or negative consequences in their lives because of things that they're doing or not doing, they don't change until they're tired of being the way they are and having the consequences because of the way they are. So someone who isn't good at setting boundaries will not start setting boundaries until they can no longer bear the consequences and the pain of not having set boundaries. And so we are working with them to try to bring them to a place where they can acknowledge the consequence and say, okay, I'm ready to do something about it. Now, a lack of healthy boundaries could come in a lot of different forms, and I want to just lay out a few scenarios. And as I do it, I want you to think through what are the boundaries that are being crossed here, or where are the issues of boundaries in each of these situations that are unhealthy and so that are causing negative consequences for people. And I also want you to observe, are the people healthy or unhealthy, or is the boundary healthy or unhealthy? And also, whose responsibility is it to bring right relationship? Is it the people who are coming into the boundaries, or is it the one who needs to set the boundaries? So where is the responsibility of the boundary setter for how he or she is feeling, for what he's saying, what he's communicating? So let's just go through these. The first one, a young woman has a history of relationships with men who seem to treat her badly. Why do I find all the unhealthy guys, she asks. Her present boyfriend is affectionate and attentive when they're alone, but when they go out, he chats to too many other women, doesn't pay much attention to her. He also is very protective and private about his phone, and she often finds him messaging and receiving messages on the sly. When she brings up how she feels about these things, he tells her she's being petty and jealous and that she's overreacting. Then she feels guilty for confronting him and she apologizes, but she has a growing resentment and a sadness, and she wonders, what's wrong with me? The next scenario, a teenager gets his license and his first car. He often gets calls from numbers of friends asking for lifts to and from various social events. He ends up having to leave an hour early in order to pick everyone up before an event, and then gets home very late due to dropping them all off. All of his allowance goes into buying petrol for his car, and he feels taken advantage of. Third scenario, a man lends 2,000 rand to a friend for the church, in the church, who is struggling financially. After several months, there's no mention of the money, which has not yet been paid back. The man doesn't want to bring it up, but he notices that his friend has been buying new clothes, and he hears that he's just come back from a really nice holiday. The man feels resentful, angry, and he doesn't want to confront it, so he rather decides that he will turn the other cheek and forget about the loan. Final one. A couple are very active in ministry, involved in counseling many couples and families, leading various groups. They are out 5 evenings a week, and people enjoy this couple and look to them for leadership and input in various projects. They also get invited to many social events, which they see as opportunities to build relationship with others in the church. But both are people pleasers, and they struggle to say no, not wanting to disappoint or hurt people that they love. But they are noticing that their own relationship is taking strain. They rarely have time to spend time alone and build on their relationship. And they realize that they need to make some changes. Now, these all are very real situations, and they all are about people who have difficulty setting boundaries in one form or another. Now, a common characteristic of people who struggle to set good boundaries is a low sense of self-worth. And most of us, to some degree, will struggle with self-worth around, say, particular people. But generally speaking, if somebody has low self-worth, they will battle to set boundaries with others because they're looking to others for approval and acceptance. And you cannot set a boundary with somebody who, when you also need their approval. So if we need someone's approval, we won't be able to set boundaries with them. And so in the first scenario, the woman had very low self-esteem. And so with low self-worth, we also can be quite vulnerable to being drawn to people who are very unhealthy because their bad treatment of us reflects how we feel about ourselves. And so when you see situations of women getting involved with men who are really unhealthy, irresponsible, they cheat on them, they're abusive, then generally there's a very low self-esteem that ties in with that. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that with low self-esteem, you're not going to be drawn to someone who's really healthy because that's far too threatening, because a healthy person will reject us if we have low self-esteem because we feel like we're not good enough for that. So unconsciously we will be drawn naturally to somebody who isn't very healthy because it seems safer. We wouldn't expect, they don't have the power to reject us the way that a healthy person has. And so one of the key things with this woman is self-esteem. And so when you're working with someone like this, for her to be able to draw a line and end a relationship with a man like this, there's an idolatry that's there. And really the fear of God needs to be greater than the fear of this guy's rejection. And so she's going to have to, so we can teach her how to say no and teach her how to end the relationship. But she, without addressing how she feels about herself, she'll run right back to him, or she'll allow him to continue treat her badly, and she'll take the blame for it because it feeds into how she already feels about herself. The other situations are more around normal relationships that have poor boundaries, and then they cause a lot of conflict. So it's not necessarily really unhealthy people who are involved, but it can be relatively healthy people who don't have good boundaries, and it causes chaos. So with the teenager, the dynamic here really is about communication, the ability and the conviction to express need and to express what the parameters of the offering of the car really are. And so if he's feeling resentful, there's a saying that says silence gives permission. So if I'm silent about what I don't like, then you don't know that, and so it gives you permission to carry on doing what you're doing because you don't know. So his friends are going, oh, this is great, you're so kind, and they're thinking like he never asked for money and he doesn't mind coming to get us. This is like really fabulous. And because he's not saying anything and he's just being really generous, they think it's fine. So his silence is giving permission for them to ask for a lift without paying. And so he needs to communicate. The boundary is, this is what I need in order for this to work well for all of us. That, hey guys, it takes quite a bit of money for me to fill up my car. So every time we go out, I'd like you all to pitch in and give me 10 Rand each. And then our petrol will be fine. Tick, the problem is solved because he's communicated it. The second thing would be, when we go out, I want you all to meet at John's at 6:45 at night so that we can get to the event by 7 o'clock, and I'll pick you all up. And then when we come back, I'll drop you all off at John's place, and then you can sort yourselves out from there. So again, it's about communicating his need unapologetically because his need is valid. And then if not worrying about how people respond. Healthy people will go, okay, that's great. An unhealthy person will go, oh, well, I don't want to do this and I don't need this. I'm going to go somewhere else. And you say, fine, go. You can get your own lift there then. So it's about communicating his need. In the situation with the money, it's always a touchy thing to lend money. And it's very important that there are clear boundaries of what that loan looks like. So you need a boundary of time where you say, I'm lending you the money, but you need to return the money by within 1 month. If I don't hear from you, then I'm going to speak to you, and if you're not able to repay it at that time, then we need to make a plan from there. But it's very important that it gets communicated what the expectations are, or otherwise there's hurt and resentment and frustration and guilt, and the one doesn't know. And if you never put a deadline on when a loan gets paid back, the person lending it will always think that that deadline is shorter than the person who's borrowed the money. That just is the nature of money. The final situation is a very typical problem of being too busy and not being able to say no. Whether it's out of guilt or obligation, or you actually enjoy doing things, or you see the need. And again, it really is about what has God called us to do. And we do only what he's calling us to do. And that means that we say no to certain things. And also realizing too that for every no that we say, for every yes that we are saying, we're saying no to something else. And often when people are getting overly busy in ministry, the no is then being said either to their time with the Lord, quiet time, time with their spouse, time with their children, time with their family. And so the priorities get mixed up quite radically. And so it's really important that we help people to address whether or not what they're doing is what God has called them to do. So how then do we help people to set healthy, godly boundaries? In working with people, it requires an incredible amount of patience and support and encouragement and prayer and perseverance. Understand that generally speaking, when people don't have good boundaries, it's come from their childhood. It was a way that they learned to protect themselves, to keep themselves out of trouble, to appease those adults around them, to keep the peace. And so we're asking them basically to stand everything they've known on their head and do it entirely differently. And they don't know how to do that. And one of the things we have to work with is a denial around it. For them, it has been their reality. And it can take a long time for their eyes to see what we see so clearly. And they'll call it other things. They will excuse it away. They will, and to let go of seeing the need to keep people happy, to let go of that is a terrifying thing for them. We're asking so much of them. And so one of the first things that has to happen is they've got to be able to see it and buy into it. And once they can see it, then, and they can hold that, then you can really work with them. And I would say we're constantly dealing on two levels. And those levels are the deeper level of what is driving the behaviors. And then on the other level, we're looking at the practical things that they need to learn in order to start setting boundaries on a regular basis. Now, the driving force underneath it, I would say, is almost always idolatry. And so it's putting people and their opinions and their views of us and the need to please them on a high priority above the need to please God. And so it's like we're driven to have to get approval to feel good about ourselves. And so we've got to help them to see it as idolatry, that it's actually a sinful pattern where they have set something else up in the place of God, be that a person or people, to say that they're okay rather than God. And so there needs to be an awareness of that, a recognizing of that, and a repentance and a willingness to turn away from it. So idolatry is at the root of our lack of boundary setting. And so in it, there's a fear of rejection, there's a need to please, the fear of disapproval. And so they've got to work with all of those, all of the fruit of idolatry, in order to see it for what it is and say, okay, I need to make some changes here. And then on a very practical level, we're helping them then how very practically to step out of that. And the first thing is that it's very overwhelming, and so we're doing it in baby steps. So we're saying, we want you at this one time to draw a line and say no. And that's like, whoa, I don't know if I can do that. Well, one time, and we're there for them. In fact, we even give them what they need to say sometimes. And then we go out and let them test it, and they come back, and we encourage them, and we celebrate when they got it right, and they realize the world didn't fall apart when they set the boundary. We also prepare them that when they set a boundary, there are going to be a whole lot of very typical responses. Now, for some people, when we set the boundary, we are going to lose the relationship. And we have to accept that because the relationship is unhealthy and is feeding off of your inability to say no. You've got to understand that when you start saying no, that person is going to go away because they don't want to relate healthily. They want to find someone who will let them be the way that they are. So with some people, we've got to prepare them for the reality that that person is going to go away, but that they will survive it and that it's a good thing. But there are also a lot of other responses that we need to prepare them for. So for instance, when somebody says no, the person who's being said no to is not used to it, is going to do a typical selection of moves or maneuvers to try to get the person to say yes again. So they will manipulate in a variety of forms. They may try guilt, they may try intimidation, they might shame you, they might say, oh, you call yourself a Christian. They might do self-pity, but you're the only one who understands me. How can you do this to me? They might go into, oh, I'm so hurt. I can't believe that you would wound me this way. And what you do is you just mentally go, okay, yeah, tick the boxes. Yeah, they tried that, they tried that, they tried that. And you keep saying, I'm sorry, but I just am not able to do that. I'm sorry, but I'm just not. Yeah, that may be, but I just don't want to do that. And so we teach them how to anticipate all the maneuvers of manipulation, and they keep on saying no. And so that's very important, anticipating the maneuvers. And then with actual saying no, there are real skills around how to say no. And so we teach them that you can say no without giving a reason. And why that's so important is that whenever you say no and you give a reason, you give that person something they can tear down or disqualify. And so, for instance, if I say, no, I really can't because I'm working on Monday night, they say, okay, well then what about Tuesday night? So they've removed your excuse, and now either you've got to say yes or you've got to come up with another excuse. Whereas we're allowed to say, first of all, we're allowed to say, you know what, I appreciate you asking me, but I honestly don't want to. And with I don't want to, nobody can argue with that. If you don't want to, you don't want to. You can't strip it away. So, but that one can be a very, very hard one to say. But we also can say things like, I really appreciate you asking, but I'm afraid that I'm already committed over that time. Or you can say, thanks, I will think about it, but I can almost guarantee that the answer is going to be no. Or you can say, look, I really appreciate it, but not right now. Or there are a lot of different ways of saying no that are very clearly no, but you're not giving them anything that they can pick apart to get you to change your mind. And we can actually do it without lying. Your no is your no. You know, the Bible says, let your yes be yes, your no be no. That we don't have to add anything to it to make it more powerful. You can even say, appreciate you thinking about me and asking me that, but I'm just in a season right now where I'm having to close the door to a lot of things because I need to do some work on myself. We're allowed to say that. So we give them skills that they can begin to use in various situations in order to learn to say no. Then we help them to deal with their guilt after they have said no and the fallout of that. And sometimes what we have to walk them through is that they go into the situation, they're ready to say no, and they come back and they said yes. And so then the yes is an opportunity to recover from a yes. And so then they can go back and say, you know what, I did say yes, but I've been thinking about it, and actually, I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to change my mind and say no. And they are allowed to change their mind. So we're supporting them as they begin to set those boundaries with people. So I want to close with that. Boundaries, there are so many dynamics around it, but ultimately it really is about being able to say no to all the things so that we can say yes to what God has called us to say yes to. And even better, we're saying yes to God, and then out of that, saying no to the things that aren't what God has called us to. So I hope that this has been a little bit helpful for you all, and I've really enjoyed looking at the boundaries topic and giving some perspective. So thank you so much.